I wonder if I can invite you to come back with me to 1975. I say back loosely because I see that there's probably people who've never been there. At the time, I was 8, and I lived in hot, sunny, sticky San Diego, California. I went to Florence Nightingale Elementary School, and I was in 3rd grade. I was a little girl who didn't like to be dirty. Scratch that. I was a little girl whose mother didn't like her to be dirty. Actually, I was a little girl whose mother was a Virgo and didn't like anything to be dirty. It was, for those of you who weren't alive then, it was a time of sitcoms and superheroes and lots of escapism, hence Fantasy Island. It was also a time of a lot of television. I really think that based on what we had come out of in the 60s and probably where we were headed, we needed a lot of distraction. I know as a little girl, in my life, I needed a lot of distraction, and television was the answer for that, a great deal of the time. This particular hot, sticky day, how does she remember it's hot and sticky, you're probably saying? Well, I was one of probably 5 dark, curly-haired Jufro girls in a sea of blonde, blue-eyed Californians. It was a time of the Beach Boys and Surfin' USA, and I didn't fit in any way. This particular day, the sun was directly overhead. It was so hot. I remember all the hairs on my arms standing up. I didn't have the sweat glands at that time yet, so that my underarms were sweaty, but pretty much everything else was, and all the black, fro-y curls were sticking to my forehead. And it was recess. And I don't know what recess was like in California. In Colorado, but in California, it was a huge dirt and gravel lot. Pretty much a lot, except that there was also a school there. And there was chain link fencing all around the perimeter. It seemed really, really big to me because I was 8 and probably about this big. In reality, I'm not sure how big it was, and I wasn't sure if the fences were to keep us in or to keep other people out. That particular day, I remember hearing a friend of mine scream from across the playground, and I looked over, and this little blonde, tow-haired boy who had every teacher's attention in every class all of the time was poking her, and she was saying, "Stop, stop, stop poking me." And I looked over to the right where I knew that the monitors always were, and they had those long chains with the whistles around their necks so that everybody on the opposite side of this very large schoolyard could hear them. But they were busy probably talking about their dates the night before. And I look back over, and now she's on the floor because he's pushed her down. And I closed my eyes in that moment, and I didn't care that I looked different from everybody else. I knew there was one person that I looked like, and she was my idol. And I closed my eyes, and I took a deep breath, and I embodied every essence of her being. And as I put my hands on my hips and screamed, "Wonder Woman!" at the top of my lungs, and looked over to where he was, and now he's looking up, this little tow-haired boy. And now these women have stopped revisiting their wine and their boyfriends from the night before, and they too are looking at me. And I left my body because now I was in hers. And I took off running with all my might towards this little boy who looked more horrified than I'd seen anybody but my little sister look. And as I got to him, the little girl on the floor had stopped crying. She was more interested in this than anything that he had done to her. And he looked at me, and within seconds, without even thinking, I took my hands and I grabbed his arm, short sleeve shirt, hot San Diego day, and I sunk my fingers into his pudgy little arm. And I remember thinking, ooh, I've never done this before, except to my sister, and she wasn't pudgy. And I closed my eyes, and I said, come on, let's do it. And I spun, and I can't do it up here, with all, here. I took his arm, and I spun, and I spun, and I spun, I think maybe 3 times. And then I just let go. And I let go, and then I opened one eye. And I watched as this boy slid face first across this dirt and gravel. And now, I was aware of nothing but that, but yet I felt these bony fingers digging into my arm, thinking, you're not my mother, only she does that. And looked up, and this woman's face was so horrified, like I had perpetrated the worst crime she could possibly imagine. Forget the little girl on the floor crying, who I had just saved. And she said, you're coming with me to the nurse's office. And I watched as the second woman scooped down and picked up this little boy crying and bloody and snotty. And she said, you're coming with me to the nurse's office. I followed. We got to the nurse's office. They laid the little boy on the nurse's table, and they took out what I would later learn were those long silver tweezers that you used to dissect frogs in high school. And they started pulling the gravel and dirt out of his nostrils. And my punishment was to watch. And when I would look away, not out of disgust because I wanted to laugh, she would say, you're looking at this. This is your punishment. I knew the real punishment was coming later from my mother, but in that moment, the evolution of that dirt was something that I had always eschewed because my mother detested it, and in that moment I knew I loved this moment more than anything else. Fast forward, I became a nurse, now I love it all.